I think it's probably fair to assume that there's a decent amount of you listening that, like, actually care about merch, maybe know something about merch. I assume there's also probably a decent amount of you listening who really have no idea and you're just listening to this because you have a sickness of the mind and you need to listen to everything that Blink-155 puts out. On second consideration, that's probably most of you. When I'm talking about merch, like capital M merch, obviously, we're talking about merchandise that bands sell, but the thing is, really, when it comes down to it, we're talking about punk and hardcore merch, we're talking about metal tees, we're talking about rap tees, some, like, alternative rock stuff, and a little bit later, like a little bit in other genres, but mostly, only insofar as they relate more broadly to, like, alternative and underground music. Obviously, there was merch before that, but, if we're going to be real, like, up until really the growth of metal and punk music, from the mid to late 70s, and really we started to see it blossoming in the 80s. Band merch was kind of secondary and kind of sucked, in all honesty. Most bands were not really merchandising heavily, and a lot of the bands that did, they're just putting, like, a logo on a baseball tee, and that's all. There is some good merch from, the early 70s and earlier than that, but most of it is kind of forgettable, if and when you can find it. Not really worth talking about. So, why I bring this up is because I want to point out that when I'm alluding to metalcore-ish shirt designs, what I'm talking about is that as a kid who grew up being into, like, punk, hardcore, stuff like that mostly. And when I say punk and hardcore, I'm doing dishes now. I'm mostly talking about older stuff. Mostly from, like, at the very latest, the 90s. And shirts from a lot of those bands, obviously, because the DIY aspect was so much more prominent in punk than in other genres. Like, clearly it's an aspect of all, like, underground or quote-unquote extreme music, but in punk, it's really just kind of hammered in that it's like a really integral aspect of the culture, and obviously that's reflected to some degree in the aesthetics, both out of necessity and intention. You see a lot of the most classic, punk and hardcore shirt designs tend to be really simple. We're talking not just a simple graphic, but 1, 2, at most maybe 3 colors on a shirt. You're not seeing a lot of, like, really crazy multicolored designs. There are exceptions. A lot of the, like, late 80s Revelation Records bands were doing kind of crazy shit, but for the most part, you're not seeing the crazy, like, multicolored, really layered designs that are using, like, 7, 8, 9, maybe more screens.